During dinner, my sister announced she was pregnant with my husband's baby. "We fell in love," she smirked. "They wanted half my fortune." I calmly pulled out an envelope that destroyed their plans. "Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Carolyn, and this is the story of how my perfectly constructed life was demolished in a single evening, and how I built something stronger from the rubble. It all started on a Thursday in March. I remember the air in Austin still had that crisp, early spring chill, but inside my office, I was glowing. After 4 long years of pouring my heart and soul into my job as a project manager at a tech company, I had finally gotten the call. I was being promoted to commercial director. It was everything I'd worked for. The bigger salary, the corner office, the title, it was validation. I couldn't stop the silly grin from spreading across my face as I looked out at the city skyline. The first thing I did was call the 2 people who mattered most. First, Russell, my husband. Then, Brenda, my younger sister. My voice was buzzing with excitement. "We have to celebrate. Let's go to Terzo tonight," I suggested, picking the chicest Italian place in town, the kind of restaurant where a single plate of pasta costs more than some people's weekly groceries. But I could afford it now. I'd earned it. I arrived at the restaurant first, feeling on top of the world. I was wearing that navy blue dress Russell always said looked perfect on me, the one that made me feel confident and elegant. I chose a quiet table in a secluded corner, away from the main bustle. I wanted privacy for our celebration. The dining room was buzzing with the low hum of conversation from executives and well-dressed couples, the kind of environment where, after years of climbing the corporate ladder, I finally felt like I belonged. This was my world now. I had built it, brick by painstaking brick. And then, I saw them. They walked in together, and a tiny, strange knot formed in my stomach. It was just a little thing, but it was off. Brenda was beaming, a radiant, almost predatory smile that I hadn't seen on her face in a long, long time. And Russell, my Russell looked nervous. He always got a bit fidgety in expensive places, feeling like he didn't quite fit in, but this was different. There was a tension in the air around them, a charged energy I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Congratulations on the promotion, Carrie." Brenda threw her arms around me in a hug that felt just a little too tight, a little too enthusiastic. She was never the physically affectionate type, especially not with me. We settled in, ordered a $200 bottle of Chianti I'd been wanting to try, and I launched into my happy news. I told them all about the new projects I would be leading, the 40% salary increase, the incredible opportunities for international travel. I was so wrapped up in my own joy that it took me a moment to notice they weren't really sharing it with me. Brenda was listening, yes, but with an unnerving intensity, her eyes fixed on me. Russell just kept fidgeting with his napkin, tearing little pieces off, his gaze darting around the room, avoiding mine. Actually, Brenda interrupted me right in the middle of my excited rambling. "We have some news to share, too." She reached across the table and took Russell's hand. My stomach didn't just knot up this time, it plummeted. "I'm pregnant." The world stopped. I mean it literally just stopped. The chatter of the restaurant faded into a distant, muffled buzz. The warm, romantic lights of Terzo seemed to flicker and dim. All I could see were their hands, intertwined on the crisp white tablecloth. My sister's hand, holding my husband's. It felt like a mirage, something my brain couldn't possibly be processing correctly. Pregnant. My sister, Brenda, was pregnant. "I know it's a complicated situation," Russell finally spoke, his voice raspy and weak. It was the first thing he'd said since they arrived. But it happened, and we fell in love. They just watched me then, their faces a bizarre mixture of nervous expectation and a poorly disguised, smug satisfaction. It was like they were waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to make a scene that would give the other diners a juicy story to gossip about later. But I couldn't do anything. I just stared. My sister. Brenda. The little sister I helped pay for college when our parents couldn't afford it. The sister I'd given advice to, loaned money to, defended to everyone. She was sitting there, holding my husband's hand, carrying his child, and telling me this on the very night I was celebrating the biggest achievement of my career. How long? I finally managed to ask. My voice sounded strange, hollow, like it was coming from someone else. 3 months, Brenda replied, a hint of pride in her voice as she instinctively rested a hand on her still flat stomach. It started right after your birthday. My birthday had been in December. It was now March. 3 months of betrayal. 3 months of secrets and lies. 3 months of them laughing behind my back while I worked 12-hour days, exhausted but driven, dreaming of the future I thought I was building for us. The promotion I was so excited to share with the 2 people I loved most. Carolyn, say something, Russell pleaded, his voice cracking. And for the first time in a very long time, I really looked at him. I really looked at the man I had been married to for 4 years. And what I saw wasn't a man torn by guilt. He looked relieved. As if a massive weight had just been lifted from his shoulders. As if telling me this horrible, life-shattering secret was somehow liberating for him. What do you want me to say? I asked, still in that detached, alien voice. Brenda let out a short, nervous laugh. Congratulations? Look, Carrie, she said, trying to sound reasonable, I know this isn't easy, but these things happen. Love is love, right? And the baby, she stroked her stomach again, a gesture that felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. The baby needs both parents together. I didn't say another word. I slowly picked up my purse, my movements feeling deliberate and heavy. I took out 2 $50 bills and placed them on the table, more than enough to cover my share. Then, I stood up. I'm going home, I said. You two do whatever you want. As I walked towards the exit, my heels clicking on the polished floor, I heard Russell call my name, his voice laced with a pathetic sort of panic. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. In the large, ornate mirror on the wall by the door, I caught a final glimpse of them. They were still sitting at the table. And Brenda. Brenda was smiling. Growing up, Brenda had always lived in my shadow, and it drove her crazy. I was the responsible older sister, the one who got straight A's without seeming to try too hard, the one our parents pointed to as the example. She was the youngest, the spoiled one, the one our parents coddled and protected from every little bump in the road. But for some reason, that was never enough for her. We grew up in a comfortable middle-class family in San Antonio. Our dad was an accountant, and our mom was an elementary school teacher. We weren't rich by any stretch, but we never wanted for anything important. Despite that, Brenda always carried herself with this air of entitlement, as if she deserved a life of luxury that she hadn't done anything to earn. When I won a full academic scholarship to the University of Texas for business, she made a point of telling everyone it was just rich girls' luck. When I graduated with honors and landed a great internship in Austin, her comment was, well, you always knew how to sell yourself. When I bought my first small condo at 25, she asked, with a little smirk, if I wasn't being a little too ambitious. The worst part was, she truly believed she was entitled to the same things I had, but without putting in any of the work. To her, success wasn't about sacrifice or late nights studying or grinding away at a tough job. It was about luck, or connections, or some cosmic favoritism that she felt she was being denied. She'd studied graphic design, graduated without much distinction, and had been bouncing from one freelance gig to another ever since, always complaining that her clients or bosses just didn't recognize her true potential. Our parents, bless their hearts, always tried to even things out. When I bought a new Honda Civic with my own money, they dipped into their savings to buy her a used one. When my salary started to grow, they quietly increased the money they gave her each month to help with her rent. It was like they were trying to artificially keep her on the same level as me, to compensate for my success. She was always asking about my finances. It was subtle at first, disguised as sisterly curiosity. "So, what's a salary like that actually look like after taxes?" she'd ask. Or, "How much is your apartment worth now?" There was an intensity to her questions that always made me uncomfortable, a greedy glint in her eye that I chose to ignore. Now I understood. It wasn't curiosity. It was reconnaissance. When I met Russell at a work party 5 years ago, Brenda immediately made it clear she didn't think he was my type. He was handsome, charming, and worked as a car salesman at a BMW dealership. By Texas standards, he did okay for himself, maybe pulling in $5,000 a month with commissions. But it was nothing compared to my salary, which was already over $8,000 and climbing. Still, I fell for him. He was fun and affectionate, and he made me laugh after long, stressful days at the office. Russell had a simplicity to him that I found attractive, an uncomplicated view of life that was a welcome contrast to my own nature of always planning 3 steps ahead. Brenda was always polite to Russell, but I could feel the tension. It was most obvious when we all went out to dinner and the check arrived. Russell would get this uncomfortable look on his face when I'd easily pay for a meal that cost $100 per person, or when I'd buy concert tickets that were $200 each. Brenda would just sit there, watching it all with that calculating look I knew so well but had always preferred to ignore. "You basically support him, don't you?" she asked me once, when Russell had gone to the restroom during a family lunch. "I don't support him," I snapped back, irritated. "We split things proportionally to our incomes." And it was true. Russell paid what he could: groceries, gas, a few of the smaller bills. I covered the rest, like the mortgage on the condo I'd bought before we even met. It worked for us. But for Brenda, it was just more proof that I had all the luck. A great career, a beautiful apartment, a devoted husband, investments that grew every month. As if I hadn't fought tooth and nail for every single one of those things. As if it had all just fallen into my lap. I got home and the apartment was eerily silent, exactly as I had left it that morning. The bed was made, the dishes were washed, everything was in its proper place. It felt so strange, how your entire world could shatter into a million pieces, yet the physical space around you could remain completely unchanged. Russell's toothbrush was still in the holder in the bathroom. His clothes were still hanging in the closet next to mine. That ridiculous Dallas Cowboys mug he loved so much was sitting right there on the counter. I sank onto the beige leather sofa in the living room, still wearing my dress and heels, and just stared into the empty space in front of me. My mind was strangely quiet. It was like my brain's emotional processing unit had just short-circuited. I knew I should be crying, or screaming, or breaking things. But all I felt was a profound numbness, like when you bang your elbow so hard you can't feel your arm for a few minutes. I was just offline. Of course, Russell didn't come home that night. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text. "I'm at B's place. We'll talk tomorrow." B, he called my sister B. As if they'd shared that intimacy for years. As if I didn't exist. As if our 4 years of marriage were just some inconvenient detail that had finally been swept aside. I spent the rest of the night awake, pacing the 1,200 square feet of my apartment, trying to make sense of how I had gotten here. How had I not seen the signs? Were there even signs to see? Now, looking back, they seemed so obvious. Russell working late more and more often these past few weeks. Brenda calling and casually asking about my work schedule. The two of them arriving at the restaurant together, so comfortable, so practiced. Now that I thought about it, Brenda had been showing up in Austin a lot more frequently in recent months. Just came to see a few clients, she'd say with a breezy wave of her hand. She was a freelance graphic designer, so it was plausible. But Austin was only an hour-and-a-half drive from San Antonio. Why did she always stay in a hotel? Why hadn't she asked to crash on my couch like she used to in the old days? The questions swirled in my head, each one a fresh wave of nausea. When the sun finally rose, casting long shadows across the living room, I was still on the couch, my dress wrinkled, my makeup smudged. My phone showed 17 missed calls from my mother. Brenda had already told her, of course. She'd probably spun some romanticized, tragic version of the story where she and Russell were star-crossed lovers, irresistibly drawn together, with me as the unfortunate, collateral damage. I called my office and told my assistant, Simone, that I wouldn't be coming in. She could tell from the flat tone of my voice that something was seriously wrong, but she was professional enough not to pry. "Call me if you need anything, Carolyn," she said gently. "You never miss work. It must be important." She was one of the few people in the world I felt I could completely trust. I forced myself into the shower, hoping the hot water could wash away the sick, sticky feeling of betrayal that clung to my skin. And under the spray, I finally cried. It wasn't the dramatic, sobbing cry you see in movies. It was a quiet, tired, exhausted crying. The kind of crying you do when you've just lost two of the most important people in your life at the exact same time. My sister and my husband. Gone. When I got out of the shower, there were 3 new texts from Brenda. "Carrie, we need to talk. It wasn't how we wanted you to find out. I know it's difficult, but we can resolve this like adults. Call me." I deleted them all without a second thought. For the first time in my adult life, I spent an entire day doing absolutely nothing productive. I stared at Netflix without seeing it, ordered $40 worth of Chinese food that arrived cold and tasted like cardboard, and ignored the relentless ringing of my phone. It was as if my mind and body needed a full 24 hours just to process the sheer magnitude of the fact that my life, as I knew it, was over. That evening, Russell showed up. He still had his keys, of course. He still felt entitled enough to walk into the apartment I had bought on my own, as if nothing had happened. He came to get some of his clothes. He tried to talk, to explain, to justify himself while he threw his things into a suitcase. It wasn't planned, Carrie. It just happened. He said it so casually, as if infidelity was just a freak weather event, something totally beyond his control. B was going through a really tough time. She needed someone to talk to. "How long have you been together?" I asked, my voice flat. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed I had picked out, watching him fold the expensive polo shirts I had bought for him at Nordstrom. "Officially, since January. 4 months. 4 months of lies. 4 months of faked kisses and empty I love yous before we went to sleep. While I was working 60-hour weeks to get that promotion, dreaming of the future we were supposed to build together, he was already building a new life with my sister. "I'm going to find a lawyer," I said, the words feeling solid and real in my mouth. Russell stopped packing his suitcase. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since he'd walked in. A flicker of panic crossed his face. "Carrie, it doesn't have to be like this. We can resolve everything ourselves, civilly. Divide things fairly, without any complications. Civilly. Divide things fairly." As if his betrayal was a simple business transaction that could be settled with a polite handshake. As if he had any right whatsoever to the life I had built. After he left, dragging 2 suitcases behind him and promising to come back for the rest of his things on the weekend, I made the call. I called Judith, my best friend from college, who is now a top family law attorney in Houston. I told her everything, fighting to keep my voice steady, laying out the ugly facts one by one. Judith listened in complete silence. When I finally finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then a deep, heavy sigh. "Carolyn, I am so sorry," she said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "I know how much you loved him. And how much you trusted your sister." She paused again. "About the divorce. I need you to get everything together. Marriage documents, bank statements, deeds, proof of your salary and investments. Everything. I'll build the strongest possible case for you. Judith, I don't even care about the money, I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash. I just want this to be over quickly. Don't you dare say that, Carolyn, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. You fought like hell to build what you have. You are not just going to hand it over to the man who betrayed you. Do you have any idea what your total assets are even worth right now? I didn't have an exact number, but I knew it was substantial. The apartment alone was worth at least $400,000. I had about $100,000 in various investments. My stake in a tech startup was valued at $50,000. Plus, my new salary was going to be $16,000 a month. I scheduled a meeting with her for the following week and hung up the phone. That's when it hit me. I needed to find all those important documents. It wasn't something I ever thought about. Who thinks about preparing for a divorce when they believe they're happily married? I went into the second bedroom, which I had converted into a home office. I was always meticulously organized, a trait that now felt like a lifeline. I pulled up my color-coded folders, my hands shaking slightly. Bank statements from the last 2 years. Tax returns. Investment reports from Fidelity. Seeing it all laid out on the desk, everything I had achieved by 29, I felt a flicker of pride through the pain. But it all felt so fragile now, as if it could all vanish in a messy, vindictive divorce process. I picked up the green folder labeled Marriage Documents. Inside was my birth certificate and the official marriage certificate from Travis County. I was staring at it, my eyes scanning the legal text, when something caught my attention. A small, typed line under the section for property regime. Separate property regime. Complete separation of assets. Complete separation? Why would we have chosen that? Most couples in Texas opted for community property, where assets acquired during the marriage are split. And then, like a dusty file being pulled from a long-forgotten cabinet in the back of my brain, a memory surfaced. A single phrase. Prenuptial agreement. I ran to the bedroom closet, to the small safe I'd had installed years ago. It had been so long since I'd opened it that I almost fumbled the combination, my birthday, in reverse. Inside, tucked between the deed to the apartment and my passport, was a thick, sealed envelope bearing the official seal of the Travis County Clerk's office. Prenuptial agreement. Carolyn and Santos and Russell David Ferrer. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. I had a vague memory of insisting on this at the time, but the details were hazy, blurred by the excitement and romance of planning a wedding. I had been so in love, so sure of our future, that the legal side of marriage felt like a mere formality, a box to tick. But now, standing alone in my bedroom at 2 a.m, holding those crisp, letterhead pages from the law firm, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't going to lose everything I had built. Maybe there was something in these papers that could protect me from my sister's greed and my husband's staggering irresponsibility. I took a deep breath, switched on the bedside lamp, and began to read every single word, with the focus of someone deciphering the map to their own future. The memory came flooding back, sharp and clear, like a movie being played in reverse. It was a sunny Saturday in April, just 2 weeks before our wedding. I was 25 and had just closed on my first apartment, a modern 2-bedroom loft in downtown Austin that had cost me $350,000. I had done it all by myself. Russell was in a panic about the wedding preparations, complaining about the spiraling costs. I remember him standing in my new, empty kitchen, looking at the list of vendors spread across the countertop. "Carrie, are you sure we need all of this?" he'd said, his voice tight with anxiety. $15,000 for catering? $8,000 for the photographer? $12,000 for decorations? It's a lot of money. A lot. It was a lot of money. Especially for him, who was making around $4,000 a month at the BMW dealership back then. For me, having just received a significant promotion that boosted my monthly salary to $12,000, it was an investment in what I thought would be the most important day of our lives. But I understood his anxiety. He'd grown up in a family where every single dollar was counted. "Russell, relax," I had reassured him, putting my arms around him. "I'll cover most of it. You just contribute what you can. The important thing is that we're celebrating our love, together." It was in that same conversation that I brought up the idea of a prenuptial agreement. It wasn't born from mistrust. It was a practical step, suggested by my lawyer, Dr. Patricia Williams, during the apartment purchase. "Carolyn," she had said, "you're young, you're successful, and you're accumulating assets quickly. A prenup is just sensible, especially when there's a significant difference in assets between spouses. It's not about mistrust, it's about intelligent protection." When I mentioned it to Russell on a Tuesday night, he literally laughed. He almost spit out the Shiner Bock beer he was drinking. "A prenup?" he chuckled. "Isn't that for ridiculously rich people? We love each other, Carrie. Love doesn't need a piece of paper to prove anything. That stuff is for couples who are already planning their divorce. It's not about love, Russell. It's legal protection for both of us. Just in case something goes wrong." "Nothing is going to go wrong," he interrupted, pulling me close. "We're going to be happy forever. You're being paranoid, baby." He made a face, like he couldn't comprehend why I would even think about such a thing. But he eventually agreed when I pressed the issue, explaining that it would make me feel more secure. "If it's that important to you, then fine," he conceded with a sigh. "But honestly, I think you're overcomplicating something that should be simple." We went to Dr. Williams's office on a Thursday morning. I remember it vividly because Russell was hungover. He'd gone out with his buddies from the dealership the night before for a last bachelor outing. He arrived 15 minutes late, looking sleepy and disheveled, complaining that he'd probably lost a big sale because of the appointment. "Sorry, Carrie," he mumbled. "Had to come straight from work. Johnson wanted to close a deal today, but I told him I had an important appointment with you." Dr. Williams, an elegant woman in her 50s with immaculate silver hair and a sharp suit, explained the terms with the practiced patience of someone who had given the same speech hundreds of times. "Complete separation of assets," she stated clearly. "Each spouse maintains their individual patrimony. In the event of a divorce, there is no division of property, except for assets that were acquired jointly, with clear proof of mutual contribution." She looked directly at Russell. "It's important to understand that this agreement protects both parties. If you acquire significant assets during the marriage, they will be protected as well. Do you understand?" I looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction. He had a somewhat lost expression on his face. Yeah, he said, nodding a little too quickly. "Each person keeps what's theirs, right? Makes sense." It made no sense at all that he had truly understood. Russell had never shown the slightest interest in complex legal or financial matters. Whenever I tried to talk about investments or financial planning, his eyes would glaze over, and he'd change the subject or make a joke about me being too uptight with money. But he signed it. He initialed every page and signed the final one with the same casual ease he'd used to sign a credit card receipt. 15 pages of dense legal text, with specific clauses about properties, investments, future businesses, and even potential inheritance. He barely glanced at the section titles. "Now you can get married in peace," Dr. Williams had said, smiling as she stamped and filed the copies. "I hope to never see you in my office professionally again." On the drive back, as we navigated through the Austin traffic in my Honda Civic, Russell had commented, "I still think this whole contract thing is kind of weird, but if it makes you feel calm, that's what matters. In 2 weeks, we'll be husband and wife. Forever." He truly had no idea what he had signed. For him, it was just another piece of bureaucratic nonsense, a hurdle to clear before the wedding, like getting the marriage license or picking out the rings. He didn't comprehend that he was voluntarily waiving any and all rights to my present and future wealth. And I, so blinded by love and confident in our forever, didn't think it mattered. After all, love was more important than any piece of paper, right? We were going to build a life together. The contract was just a formality that would gather dust in a safe, never to be needed. How incredibly wrong I was. Now, for years later, alone in my bedroom at 3 a.m. with that very contract in my hands, I finally understood the profound value of that rich people nonsense. I read each page again, this time with laser focus, as if I were deciphering a secret code that held the key to my survival. The legal jargon that had once seemed like just formalities now shone on the page like precious diamonds. Clause 2.1 Complete separation of property. Each spouse shall maintain individual ownership of all property owned prior to the marriage and all property acquired during the marriage. Acquired during marriage. The investments I made every single month from my salary. The stock options from my company. The stake in the tech startup I had invested in 2 years ago. All of it was exclusively, unequivocally mine. Clause 4.3 Dissolution of marriage. In the event of the dissolution of the marriage, there shall be no division of property, with each party retaining the entirety of their individual assets. No division of property. Russell had no legal claim to anything. Absolutely nothing of what I had built on my own. I kept reading, searching for a loophole, a hidden clause he could exploit, but there was nothing. The contract was airtight. Dr. Williams had done an impeccable job. Then I saw it, the clause that made a small, cold smile touch my lips for the first time in days. Clause 5.1 Spousal support waiver. Both parties hereby waive any right to spousal support, alimony, or maintenance from the other party. Alimony. He had no right to alimony. Considering he earned so much less than me, he would have been the one in a position to demand financial support. And he had signed his right to it away without a second thought. Oh, Brenda. Sweet, greedy Brenda. She had likely seduced my husband with visions of a comfortable life funded by my hard work. She probably imagined him walking away from the divorce with half of everything, setting them up for life. What a delicious, bitter irony. I continued reading through the specific clauses. Debt separation, he was responsible for his own. Future businesses, any corporate participation remained individual. Inheritance, any assets received from family would remain with the original recipient. It was a suit of armor, complete and impenetrable. Russell had no right to a single cent of what I had built, and even better, I had no legal responsibility for any of his debts. I suddenly remembered the Ford F-150 truck he had financed the year before, and the high-limit credit card he used so freely. I grabbed my laptop and started to make a quick, mental inventory of my net worth. The apartment, now valued at over $400,000. Investments in stocks and funds, totaling around $100,000. My stake in the startup, worth at least $50,000. The cash in my checking and savings accounts, another $40,000. My paid-off car, worth $20,000. It added up to over $600,000. And with my new promotion, my salary was about to jump to $16,000 a month, not including bonuses. Russell had no right to any of it. I remembered a conversation we'd had last Christmas, when Brenda was complaining about how unfair life was. "Carrie, do you realize how frustrating it is?" she'd slurred, after a few too many glasses of wine. "You have this beautiful apartment, a new car, you go on vacations, while I'm killing myself just to barely make rent." Now I understood. It wasn't frustration she was feeling. It was planning. Brenda saw Russell not as a man to love, but as a tool, an opportunity, a key to unlock the life she felt she deserved without having to work for it. She didn't love him. She loved what she thought he could give her access to, my life. I put the contract back in the safe, but not before taking clear photos of every single page with my phone. I emailed the images to Judith with a simple subject line, "Look what I found." She replied in less than 15 minutes, even though it was nearly 4 a.m. "Carolyn. This changes everything. Call me the second you wake up." For the first time since that horrible dinner at Terzo, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. And for the first time in what felt like years, I dreamed of my future. A future where I was completely, utterly free. The next morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in days. As I sat in my modern kitchen, sipping coffee and looking out my 10th floor window at the Austin skyline, I started connecting dots that had previously seemed like innocent, random coincidences. Brenda's suspicious interest in my financial life suddenly made perfect, sickening sense. It wasn't just sisterly curiosity, there was a calculating intensity in her questions that was now crystal clear. "So how much do you pay in rent for this place?" she had asked during a visit last year. When I explained that I owned it, that it was financed, her eyes lit up in a way that should have warned me. "Wow, it must be worth a fortune," she'd breathed. She asked about my salary with an unnerving frequency. "Carrie, what are you earning now?" she'd probe, adding a quick, "just trying to get a sense of the market," as if she were comparing her freelance opportunities to my corporate career path. When I mentioned I was investing in stocks, she wanted to know specific amounts. "I'm thinking about starting to invest, too," she'd lied. "I just need a reference point." I remembered that Christmas conversation at our parents' house in San Antonio again. After complaining about how I had everything, she had become bitter. "You were always the perfect daughter, the smart one, the one who gets everything so easily," she'd said, her voice dripping with resentment. "I have to kill myself just to get the crumbs." At the time, I brushed it off as the wine talking. Now I realized it was pure, unadulterated envy that had been festering for years. Brenda genuinely believed she was entitled to what I had, but without the corresponding effort. And Russell, poor, simple Russell. He was never an ambitious person financially. He was content with his dealership salary, with his simple life of weekend beers and watching football on TV. But I remembered how he would sometimes look at the things I bought with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. $400 for a purse, Carrie? That's almost my portion of the rent," he'd commented once when I came home with a new Coach bag. It wasn't criticism, exactly. It was more like he was trying to process a financial reality that was completely alien to him. Brenda had probably planted the seeds in his head, slowly and carefully. "Imagine when you two get a divorce, Russell. Half of all this will be yours. You'll be set for life." She had no idea about the prenuptial agreement, of course. I had never mentioned it to anyone in my family. It was a private matter between my husband and me. Now, I understood a snippet of a conversation I had overheard by chance a few months ago. Russell was on the phone out on the balcony, and I had assumed it was a work call. But now I remembered hearing his low voice, saying, "I don't know if it's the right time. She'll suspect something. I need to be sure." At the time, I thought he was talking about closing a difficult car sale. Now I realized he was almost certainly talking to Brenda about when and how to reveal their affair. The most painful part was the chilling realization that they had planned that entire scene at the restaurant. The choice of terzo, on the night of my promotion. The way they arrived together, a united front. The smug satisfaction on their faces. It wasn't a desperate, impulsive confession. It was theater. It was a performance designed to humiliate me in the most public and painful way possible. They wanted to see me break, to see me fall apart. They probably expected me to beg Russell to come back, to offer him anything to save our marriage. Too bad for them. They didn't know about the prenup. I spent that weekend not mourning, but strategizing. I was done being a victim. I called Judith first thing Monday morning. "Carolyn, my girl," she said, her voice buzzing with energy, "this contract is a work of legal art. It's ironclad. Russell has no right to absolutely anything. We can have this divorce processed in 60 days if he doesn't contest it." "And if he does contest it?" I asked. "Based on what?" Judith laughed. "He signed the damn thing. Everything is registered. There was no coercion or fraud. He's screwed, honey. Royally screwed. Screwed. Russell was screwed, and he didn't even know it yet. A cold, hard plan began to form in my mind. "Judith," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to call them. I'm going to propose a civilized conversation about the divorce. I want to see their faces when they find out the truth." "Carolyn, are you sure?" she asked, a note of caution in her voice. "It might be simpler to just file the papers and let me handle it." "I'm sure," I replied, a new sense of purpose hardening my resolve. They humiliated me in public. I want to return the favor. 3 weeks passed since that night at Terzo. 3 agonizing weeks where David would come by to pick up the rest of his things, always with Brenda in tow, as if he needed her for moral support or protection. 3 weeks of my mother calling me daily, trying to mediate, trying to get me to think about the baby. "Carolyn, dear, I know you're hurt," she'd plead, "but these things happen. Russell has always been a good boy, and Brenda is pregnant. Can't you just think about the poor, innocent baby? Think about the baby. The baby my sister was using as a pawn to steal my husband and, as she thought, my fortune." "Mom, I am not discussing this with you," I'd say, my voice clipped. "Russell and I are getting a divorce. Period." My mother, like everyone else, assumed that Russell was entitled to half of everything. Brenda had likely filled the entire family's heads with stories of how I was being selfish and petty for not graciously accepting their grand betrayal. In the 4th week, I finally made the call. I called Brenda. She answered on the 2nd ring, her voice eager, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Carrie. It's so good you called. We really, really need to talk." "Hi, Brenda," I said, forcing a weary, resigned tone into my voice. "Look, I've had some time to think about this whole situation, and I think you guys are right. There's no point in holding a grudge. We're all adults. These things happen." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. This was clearly not the reaction she was expecting. "Really?" she finally stammered. You're okay with this?" "I'm trying to be," I sighed dramatically. "I mean, you fell in love, right? It wasn't anyone's fault. And now there's a baby to think about." "Wow, Carrie. You have no idea how relieved I am to hear you say that," she gushed, the relief in her voice palpable. "Russell has been so worried, thinking you were going to make a huge drama, complicate the divorce." Complicate the divorce. How interesting. As if I was the difficult one in this story. "Not at all," I said smoothly. "Can we meet? To talk civilly about how to resolve everything without a fight? Just to settle things like adults. Maybe dinner again? But this time for closure, not for surprises." Brenda let out a nervous laugh. "Of course. That would be great. Russell will be so happy. He was afraid you'd, well, you know, make a scene." "No, of course not. What's the point?" I paused for effect. "Let's meet at Terzo again. Since that's where it all began." "Saturday night?" "Perfect," she chirped. "Carrie, you have no idea how important this is for us, especially now, with the baby coming." I hung up the phone and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. Saturday night was going to be interesting. Very, very interesting. I spent the next few days preparing for my performance. It felt like an actress rehearsing for the role of a lifetime. I chose my costume carefully, an elegant, severe black dress that conveyed seriousness and control. I practiced in the mirror, perfecting the calm, resigned expression I wanted to maintain. Judith still thought the idea was risky. "Carolyn, are you sure you want to put yourself through this? It would be so much more efficient to just have my office notify them." "Judith, they planned my public humiliation down to the last detail," I told her. "They deserve to get the news in the same way. And don't worry, they won't suspect a thing." They're too busy fantasizing about how they're going to spend my money. I arrived at Terzo on Saturday, punctually at 8 o'clock. I requested the exact same table we'd had before. The maitre d' recognized me and gave me a sympathetic look, commenting that he hoped tonight would be a happier occasion. If only he knew. Russell and Brenda arrived together again, but the atmosphere was completely different from our last meeting. They were relaxed, smiling, holding hands like a carefree couple in love, finally free to show their affection in public. Brenda wore a dress that was clearly chosen to highlight her small but now noticeable baby bump. "Carrie!" Brenda hugged me with what seemed like genuine warmth. "You look beautiful. Is that dress new?" "Thank you," I said, my voice even. "You both look well, too. How's the pregnancy going?" "It's great," she chirped. "We're already thinking about names. Russell wants Michael if it's a boy. I prefer Gabriel." Russell pulled out the chair for Brenda to sit down, a chivalrous gesture he had rarely ever made for me. "Carolyn," he said, his voice earnest. "Thank you for agreeing to talk like this, so peacefully. I was really afraid that you would make a drama?" I finished for him, offering a small, sad smile. "Imagine, Russell. We're all adults here. We ordered the same bottle of Chianti." The irony hung heavy in the air, but this time, the mood was one of celebration, their celebration. They thought they had won the lottery. After the first sip of wine, Russell cleared his throat and got down to business. "So," he began, "about the divorce. We were hoping to propose doing everything amicably. You know, divide things fairly, without any complications." "Divide things fairly," I repeated slowly, savoring the words. "Tell me more about that, Russell. What, exactly, do you consider to be fair?" Brenda and Russell exchanged a quick, rehearsed glance. "Well," Russell said, leaning forward, "we were thinking we could sell the apartment and split the money, 50-50. The investments, too. And, you know, with your new promotion and everything, some alimony would really help a lot, at least until I can get stabilized with Brenda and the baby." Alimony. He actually believed I was going to pay him alimony while he raised a child with my sister. It was so audacious, so utterly delusional, that I almost laughed. Instead, I slowly reached for my purse, my movements deliberate. I rummaged inside for a moment, as if I were looking for a pen or a lipstick. Russell and Brenda watched me, their eyes filled with greedy expectation. They probably thought I was about to pull out some pre-written divorce papers, ready for a friendly, on-the-spot signing that would benefit them immensely. Instead of a pen, I pulled out the thick, courthouse-sealed envelope. The paper, slightly yellowed with age, made a crisp, dry sound as I placed it on the center of the table. "Before we talk about dividing anything," I said, my voice low and clear, "I need to clarify something important. Something that you, Russell, seem to have forgotten." Russell frowned, his eyes fixed on the envelope. "What is that?" "Our prenuptial agreement, Russell," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Remember? The one you signed 4 years ago? The one you called rich people nonsense?" The color drained from his face. Instantly. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Brenda just looked back and forth between us, her confident smile faltering. "What agreement? You two had a prenuptial agreement?" "We did," I said, my gaze never leaving Russell's. "And you signed it, Russell. You signed it without even bothering to read it properly." I slid the pages out of the envelope and spread them on the table, open for them both to see. I tapped my finger on the first highlighted clause. Complete separation of assets. "Do you remember what that means?" Russell picked up the pages, his hands visibly trembling. His eyes darted across the lines of dense legal text, trying to process words he had clearly dismissed as unimportant 4 years ago. "Calm down, Carrie," Brenda said, her voice losing its confident edge. She was trying to regain control. "Even with an agreement, you were married. There's still community property, a division of assets you acquired during the marriage. Not when there's a complete separation of assets, Brenda, I said, my voice like ice. I pointed to the specific clause. It's right here. Each spouse shall maintain individual ownership of all property owned prior to the marriage and all property acquired during the marriage. Everything acquired during our marriage also stays with whoever acquired it. Which means, it stays with me. But this can't be legal. Russell protested, his voice rising in panic. People at the next table glanced over. The apartment. The investments. I lived there. I contributed to the expenses. You contributed $300 a month for groceries and gas, Russell, I stated flatly. I paid the $1,800 mortgage payment. I paid the $200 condo fees. I paid for the internet, the electricity, the insurance. Your $300 doesn't give you property rights over a $400,000 apartment. Brenda was now frantically flipping through the pages, her face a mask of disbelief, searching for some loophole, some lifeline. But alimony, she blurted out. He has a right to alimony. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd had all night. Page 5, Section 3, I said, as if reciting a poem. Spousal support waiver. Both parties hereby waive any right to spousal support, alimony or maintenance. Russell waived his right to alimony the moment he signed this document. I didn't know what I was signing. Russell practically shouted, drawing more stares. You tricked me. I tricked you? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Russell, you were sitting right there when the lawyer, Dr. Williams, explained every single clause. You said you understood. We have witnesses. It's all registered at the courthouse. It is legally binding. The expression on Brenda's face was slowly morphing from confusion to pure, unadulterated horror. The reality of the situation was hitting her like a runaway train. You mean he has no right to anything? She whispered. Nothing, I confirmed. Zero. Zilch. I put the papers back in the envelope. Russell leaves this marriage exactly as he entered it, with his finance pickup truck, his clothes, and his credit card debts. Russell slumped in his chair, running a hand over his face, the full magnitude of his mistake finally crashing down on him. Carolyn, for God's sake, we can talk about this. You can't just leave me with nothing. I'm going to have a child to support. You are going to have a child to support, I emphasized, letting the words hang in the air. With your car salesman's salary. Which, by the way, after child support payments, is going to be quite tight. Child support? Brenda asked, her voice barely a squeak. Of course, I said, enjoying this far more than I probably should have. The father has to pay child support. In Texas, the standard is 20% of net income for one child. So, if Russell earns $5,000 gross, that leaves about $3,800 net. 20% of that is $760. Every month. Until the child turns 18. They stared at each other in absolute panic. It was clear these were calculations they had never bothered to make. Plus medical expenses, I added cheerfully. Daycare, clothes, education. It's going to be quite expensive to have a baby, you guys. Russell just sat there, defeated. My God, Carolyn, he mumbled. How can you be so cold? So calculating? Calculating? Me? I let out a short, sharp laugh. You two planned this betrayal for months. You humiliated me in this very restaurant, in front of everyone. And I'm the calculating one? Brenda was clearly doing the math in her head, her lips moving silently. If Russell earned $5,000 and paid nearly $800 in support, that left $4,200 before taxes. About $3,400 net to support him, her, and a baby. Brenda, how much are you earning as a freelancer these days? I asked, my voice sweet as poison, though I already knew the answer. Well, it varies, she mumbled. About 2,000 a month, when I have projects. About 2,000, when you have projects, I repeated. So, the three of you will be living on, at best, $5,400 a month. Living where, by the way? Still in that one-bedroom apartment you rent for $800? It's going to be a bit cramped with a baby, don't you think? The silence at the table was deafening. Carolyn, Russell tried one last time, his voice pleading. Are you really going to do this? Leave us with nothing? I know we hurt you, but… Russell, you didn't just hurt me, I cut him off, my voice hard as steel. You tried to rob me. You and her. You thought I was some emotional, hysterical idiot who would just roll over and hand you half of my $600,000 net worth because you were in love. $600,000? Brenda whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Surprise! I said with a fake, bright smile. I'm even richer than you imagined. And now with the promotion, I'll be earning $16,000 a month, while you two are fighting over money for diapers. Russell finally buried his face in his hands. I'm an idiot, he groaned. A complete idiot. Finally, I said. Something we can both agree on. Brenda tried one last, desperate card. Carrie, you're my sister. We're family. You can't just abandon us like this. What about your niece? Or nephew? Don't you want to help? I looked at her, at the fake tears welling up in her eyes, and I felt nothing but contempt. Brenda. You tried to steal my husband because you thought you could steal my fortune along with him. You made a bad calculation. And now, you will have to live with the consequences of your choices. Family doesn't betray family. Family doesn't humiliate family in public. And family certainly doesn't seduce their sister's husband out of pure, pathetic greed. I stood up from the table and placed two $50 bills on top of the prenup. Your lawyers can contact mine, I said crisply. Judith Williams, in Houston. She has all the necessary information. Carolyn, wait, Russell said, scrambling to his feet. No, Russell. You waited. You waited 4 months to tell me the truth. You waited until the night of my promotion to maximize my humiliation. You waited until you thought you had everything planned out perfectly. Now, it's my turn to make you wait. Wait for what? Brenda asked, the tears finally starting to fall for real. I paused at the edge of the dining room and looked back at them, two pathetic figures at a table meant for celebration. Wait to see what it's like to be poor. What it's like to live counting every penny. What it's like to not be able to afford dinner at a $200 restaurant. I held their gaze for a long moment. Maybe now you'll understand why I work so hard to have what I have. And why I will always protect what is mine. I walked out of Terzo, hearing the sound of Brenda finally breaking down into sobs behind me. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below. That lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement and keeps me going. Please, comment the number 1, and let me tell you what happened next. The divorce was finalized in exactly 60 days. True to Judith's word, Russell didn't contest it. Any competent lawyer would have told him he didn't have a leg to stand on. On a sunny morning in July, I officially became a single woman again. And with that single piece of paper, a profound weight lifted off my shoulders. I was free. Through the family grapevine, mostly my mother's unavoidable, worried phone calls, I followed the slow-motion car crash of Russell and Brenda's new life from a safe distance. Russell kept his job at the BMW dealership, but things got tough. The economy took a slight downturn, luxury car sales dropped, and his commissions plummeted. According to my mother, he was barely making $3,500 a month. "Carolyn, Russell is really struggling," my mother said during one of our calls. "With the child support payment for the baby, there's hardly anything left for him to live on." The baby, a little girl they named Audrey, had been born in September. "What a shame," I'd reply, my voice devoid of any real sympathy. "Babies are expensive." He should have thought of that before. The $800 monthly child support payment was being automatically deducted from his paycheck, a constant reminder of his obligations. Brenda had to move back home with our parents in San Antonio. The little one-bedroom apartment she'd been renting was impossible for a couple with a newborn. So now our retired parents, living on a fixed income, were supporting 3 adults and a baby under one roof. "Brenda is trying to get more freelance clients," my mother would sigh, "but it's so difficult with the baby. And Russell, he just seems so tired all the time, working late, and then driving that hour-and-a-half commute between Austin and San Antonio every single day." He had tried to get a transfer to a dealership in San Antonio to be closer, but they didn't have any openings. So he was burning a fortune on gas he couldn't afford, stuck in a life he had chosen but clearly hadn't planned for. While their world was shrinking, mine was expanding in ways I had never imagined. With the drama behind me, all my energy, all my focus, went into my career. As commercial director, I didn't just meet my targets for the first quarter, I obliterated them. My bonus was huge, and in some months, my take-home pay topped $22,000. The tech startup I was a partner in secured a new round of investment, tripling the value of my shares overnight. In October, I found a new place. A spectacular 2-story loft downtown, with 3 bedrooms and a private terrace overlooking the lake. I sold my old apartment for $500,000, a tidy profit, and bought the new loft for $700,000, paying cash. I spent another $200,000 on a complete renovation, creating my dream home. A German kitchen, a private gym, a home office with a panoramic view. It was so stunning it ended up being featured in Austin Home and Design magazine. At 30, my net worth sailed past the $1 million mark. I had a solid career, complete financial freedom, and the ability to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. I traveled to Europe 3 times that year: Paris, Rome, Barcelona. Always alone, always first class. The loneliness I had feared never came. After the profound betrayal, the peace of being alone was a luxury. I started therapy, not because I was sad, but because I wanted to grow. My therapist helped me understand that for years, I had been the designated caretaker for everyone around me: my sister, my parents, my ex-husband. "When was the last time," she asked me, "that someone truly took care of you?" It was a simple question, but it broke me open. I had always been the provider, the problem solver. It was time to put myself first. During the holidays, the messages from Brenda started. First, cautious attempts at reconciliation. Then, direct pleas for money. "Carrie, I know you're upset, but we're sisters. Audrey is your niece. Can't you at least help with some baby things? The expenses are so high. Diapers, medicine. Russell is killing himself working, but we can't cover everything. Carrie, for God's sake, answer me. We need help. You're the only one in the family who can afford it." I read them all and deleted them. After the 10th one, I blocked her number. On my 30th birthday, I threw a huge party at my new loft. 50 of my closest friends, French champagne, live music. As I stood on my terrace, looking out at the glittering lights of Austin, surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated my success, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude that Russell had betrayed me, because without it, I never would have discovered my own strength. Gratitude for the prenuptial agreement that my younger self had the foresight to insist upon. And yes, even gratitude for Brenda. Without her bottomless greed, I never would have learned that some family ties are toxic and need to be cut. A few weeks later, my father called. It was rare for him to get involved, so I knew the situation was critical. "Carolyn, your mother didn't want me to call, but things are very difficult here. Russell, he lost his job at the dealership last week. Year-end cuts. For the first time, I felt a pang of genuine guilt, not for them, but for my parents, who were caught in the middle. "Dad," I said, my voice softening. "I can help you. I will not give a single penny to Russell or Brenda directly. But if you need help with the electric bill, or groceries, or a doctor's visit for Audrey, you send me the bills, and I will pay them directly." My father accepted, relieved. For the next few months, I'd get the occasional email with a bill attached. Trivial amounts for me, but a lifeline for them. I never had direct contact with Russell or Brenda again. According to my dad, Russell eventually found another job at a much smaller dealership, earning about half of what he used to. They finally moved out of my parents' house and into a trailer park on the outskirts of San Antonio. It was all they could afford. The child support was still being deducted, leaving them with almost nothing. "They fight all the time about money," my father told me sadly one day. He blames her for pushing for the divorce. She blames him for losing his good job. It's a vicious cycle. It was exactly what happens when a relationship is built on greed instead of love. The moment the financial reality hits, the fantasy disappears. 2 years after the betrayal, my life was completely transformed. I learned to say no without guilt. I learned that my self-respect was non-negotiable. And I learned that some people are simply incapable of real love, they only see others as resources to be used. I started dating a wonderful man, Walter, an architect I met at an art gallery. Our relationship was a true partnership, built on mutual respect and admiration, not dependency. On the 3rd anniversary of that fateful night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Russell. "Carolyn, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I just need to tell you something. You were right. About everything. About me, about Brenda, about the money. I was an idiot, and I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I hope you're happy." Reading it, I didn't feel anger or satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of closure. He finally understood, but it was far too late. I had moved on. I deleted the message without responding. Today, at 32, I look back at that horrible night at Terzo, and I see it for what it was, the best gift I could have ever received. It forced me to become the woman I am today, the executive director of my company, with an annual salary of over $300,000 and a net worth that has surpassed $2 million. Russell and Brenda are still living in that trailer park, still fighting about money they don't have. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel guilty for having so much while they have so little. But then I remember. They didn't just make a mistake. They tried to rob me. They planned my humiliation. They calculated my emotional and financial destruction. The fact that their calculations were wrong is not my fault. I built my life with honest work and smart decisions. They tried to take a shortcut through betrayal and discovered that some shortcuts lead straight to a dead end. My story isn't about revenge. It's about justice. It's about learning that when you stop supporting people who only drain you, you have so much more energy left to build something truly extraordinary for yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, or if you've ever been through something similar, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. You are not alone.